Mr. Soumitro Ghosh, as a partner, joined Mathew and Ghosh Architects, a partnership founded by Nisha Mathew Ghosh in 1995. The work is varied across the spectrum and ranges from projects or ideas to do with urban, research, space and architecture, to interior and product design, and so on. The architectural practice of 25 years, which has been of a diverse nature in projects and activities, rarely repetitive, makes it an inquisitive practice of eager generalists. On similar lines, this essay-like presentation shall try to unfold bits of surrounds of the practice and pick selected works as illustrative samples, looking at the works with as much and as little sureness. Welcome to KRVIA.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the KRVIA forum and look forward to sharing some of our work with you. So I'm going to start with, I was wondering in the last few weeks about still life and which possibly, I don't know if it is subconsciously related to the times that we are living in. Maybe, I'm not sure. So I've been looking at still life paintings of a lot of the masters and wondering about why they did what they did. And the first thing that I noticed was the meticulousness and realism of these of the vegetables, fruits, and various things which are in the setting, which is all within a house. I think in some ways where I do find a link with possibly with architecture is that these paintings which were drawn, they were actually sort of metaphorical, and they had in the beginning, because it was under the Catholic Church and is likely to have had biblical connotations for different objects. So there can be, whether it's the fruits, which is perhaps equivalent to the soul of man, or even paradise, and fruits, which are the produce in paradise. There is also reference to other things, whether it's a skull, which talks about the sure end of life and that control over humanity, or whether it's the China bowl, which is in some ways that the soul is fragile, and whether it's the bread or whether it's the wine, it has various connections to human life and perhaps to religion. But I think it was the meticulousness which actually I found very interesting, which was about looking for perfection. And that sort of changes over time at the hands of different artists. And when it comes to Van Gogh or even Braque and Picasso, the earlier realistic representation of which was taken to be as a connotation of truth, I think that's where there is a connection between the art, religion, and perhaps what we try to do, and let's say what Mies says that about detail, that God lies in the details, is not very different. So when the cubists start looking at this, they have, of course, they look at it much more from a scientific viewpoint and multiple perspectives and representation. So it becomes more conceptual in some ways and much less literal. And Cezanne, of course, his backdrops are very interesting because they sort of take it into any other space which could be anywhere. It's an abstract background. Picasso deforms things, yet the elementary nature of every object is not lost. Warhol brings at a different time an industrially produced object, and Lichtenstein with his characteristic style with the dots makes his still life, which is from the studio. And whether it is Giorgio, who makes this in very light shades, so one can imagine interiors of very light shades, and whether that actually sort of makes us sober and has minimal and somewhat another dimension to it. The day-to-day objects like bananas and things like that, and then Georgia keeps, of course, takes it to another level, where the closeness makes it so large and all-consuming, while Armand's accumulation, which is just assembled objects of real objects actually, and the only part is the act of assembly of the spoons and forks in the resin tray. Bhupen Kakkar's work, and I've been trying to investigate about how contemporary Indian artists have tried to look at the idea of not so much as still life, but maybe the stillness of life and the home. And that's where I find Bhupen's work very interesting. There is a certain distance, there is a certain quietude, there is almost a connect and a disconnect. And the colors are rather real, but or possibly honest and true, but not but drawn in a deliberately amateurish way to convey meanings and intent. Sudhir Patwardhan's work, which I have loved in this aspect, which is about the home and its relationship to the outside, always from the inside, and how the ordinary settings can be the object of somebody's eye and view to be painted. This work by Jitish and the other by Jagannath. I think these objects, especially Jitish's piece here, is so ordinary, perhaps every other home. And I think this is something perhaps as architects we forget. And that's why I think it intrigues me that these are recovered and put forth. So I'm going to start with homing, the idea of a home. The first house we ever built, which is my mother-in-law's house with Nisha. So while I was doing that, for the first time, and I have to thank KRVIA for this, that I actually drew the plan of the house where I lived for from the time I was born to grade 12. So it was a house with a courtyard, and I was trying to remember. So this was a colony kind of thing in a sugar mill in close to Delhi. And so it had a big garden on the side, it had a courtyard, it had a huge farm-like backyard. So I was listing down all the fruits and vegetables that we would get from there, and all the flowers that I remember from that house, just to see if I get anything out of it. I'm not sure if I do, but so this is the first house built in '95, and I think having done quite a few homes, I think this home, of course, being the first, I think it carries strong, very strong. A few things it carries, which is the return from Ahmedabad. So whether it's in the proportion of the windows or openings, or trying to deal with the climate, because this is the southwest wall, so you try to take deep, ingress of wind from there. And of course, as you can see, this whole place is pretty much populated now. So this is quite amazing to see 25 years ago. A fairly strict budget house. I think it was about the sequence of entrance. I think it's how life sort of plays out inside. So there is the sense of an entry, and the rest becomes rather porous. So it has a sequence of courtyards and gardens, so that it closes itself partially up with blank walls, because it's on the edge of the sites, and makes a garden at the back. And the garden at the back is surely a bit of a difference. Of course, this is a very interesting site because it's only 30 feet wide and 80 feet deep. So the garden is actually the most precious space, where there are beautiful trees now. This is, of course, 25 years ago. And of course, there are terraces and rooms which open out, and there is a patio. And so it's actually trying to enable a kind of life which could play out. So the living and the dining is pretty much like a veranda which opens to the garden at the back, and the little dog Cuddles, who's no more with us. That was her standard position, to survey the whole house. From there, a very standard system. We had great help from Chitra Vishwanath, a dear friend and a wonderful architect. And so what we did was the precast panel system for the roofs and the precast beams. And we started to work with the rhythm and the discipline of it, and yet try to open it up and proportion spaces, simple stone lintels and clay terracotta floors. So I mean, I don't know if it also carries, perhaps it does, of Villageois, Corbusier's work. And so I think these things sort of remain in some ways. Maybe even the colors do. It's good to look back at this moment. And the rhythm of the structure actually defines how the walls meet the beams, and create certain panels and proportions, and certain spaces link up with smaller effects of light, natural light, to private spaces. So when making a home, I think my point here with this slide is about how much do we play it out the way we live, or do we present it to be impressive? So while one is, they're almost from the same year actually. I think it's 2012. Sorry, the background has become black. That's why you don't see the date. Both are from the same year. So it's a position, I think it's a position which one takes, is whether we play it out as easily and as authentic as it comes, or we gloss it up. The idea of the office as a home, and now I think we are so much more familiar with the idea of work from home. So this is actually a corporate office, which is, and this is because I'm now doing a corporate office again after a number of years, and this time the client actually spelled it out very clearly, and this is not the same client, who said that I want it actually to be like the home. And I think this is where it struck me that actually, why if one is honest and comfortable in the home, if that same thing extends to the space where you work, wouldn't that be fantastic? Because I think the comfort of not just the physical comfort, but the psychological ease of being in such a space for long periods of time makes it very, very unpretentious and very easy to be in. And light plays an extremely important role. So these orange lines that you see are actually, I was walking down the street in Bangalore, and I would see these 4 or 5 story tall buildings, which were just about 4 feet apart, or 5 feet, or maybe 6 feet, almost, that when each one opens their window shutters, they would touch. So I looked at the kind of light which actually came. So actually that actually became the building in a box. So these interstices of light which emerged as the primary idea, where you shut yourself off. And I think this may be a problematic, and I think I'll be quite honest at different junctures, because I think there are some things which I don't have answers and may have other questions, and will find some of the answers gradually, but about some present questions is about why in this case the client wanted to shut out to the outside because of its uncertainty, and I sort of agreed. So it actually became a container, a volume which is sliced, and the glasses are frosted so that they would, number one, they would not look dirty, and just 6 mm thick glass, toughened, and they would bring light right into the core of the building. That's a little model that we did of the office. So you see the light sort of penetrating down right to the basement, and it's just 4 feet wide. There was just one tree in the front. So it's a very simple building with 3 floors in front, 3 floors at the back, and 1.5 floors each in the middle. And that's the jackfruit tree. So you enter the building, which is a simple geometric volume with a little pop out of a extended balcony. But inside is something different, because it just captures the light in a very gentle way, and it comes right down, doesn't heat too much, and it also has turbo vents to pull out the hot air. So the office gets light like this till sunset. So it's only within about 3-4 months that we came to know that the electricity consumption, because this is in 2002, was just about 30% of what we were supposed to consume. So which was a great thing to know, that it was performing very well. And I think the bigger thing that it did was it created a very gentle environment, which felt almost like sitting in a veranda everywhere. And I think that was the nice thing, that people, and even I still work for on some projects with this client and friend. So it's a pleasure, you know. There is hardly anything pretentious about it. It's very, very simple, and just lets you absorb it, and perhaps almost interestingly not to notice it at all. And I think that's perhaps a beginning of a good building, that you don't notice it because it's so easy on you. So these are the various spaces, and you see the skylight, the light coming down. So everything is naturally lit, and it's soft. That's the skylight here. So this is the skylight which takes it down. So this floor, which was done after, it was done about 3 or 4 years ago, the top floor with the courtyard. So it, so the MD sort of moved onto the top floor with just a simple sloped concrete roof, with a courtyard in the middle and his father's office on the other side of the courtyard. So just rectangular space. So so I think the kind of surfaces that it creates and the spaces it creates, it is able to absorb a lot of life around it. I think that's what it does, and yet it never feels pretentiously minimalist, because of course I hate the term. It's something which so that you need to enjoy the environment. In the same year, actually, we finished a church, and Nisha had designed, you will see her sketch, the Baptist church. So the interesting thing about this building was about that this would be a place which will have no symbolic value. Just, I mean, people associate religious structure as something which is sacred. Well, they do not consider this as sacred. This was a place of fellowship. So, which was challenging, because I think the intent was that people would come, pray together, worship together, and yet and the ambience would create or help that to happen, and yet it would not take any. So there was no cross. There was no literal representation other than a few text paragraphs from the Bible. So this, of course, was in a very, again, in a very uncertain development, uncertain of the development around area. So it actually, again, in this case too, it became a box, but it sort of made plinths which extended out. So it actually has a very traditional plan of an amphitheater. It has an extremely traditional plan with the baptism tank under the stage and suspended balconies. But yet what it does is, I think it does two things. One is from the roof, and second is what it does from the outside to the inside with its layers of the wall. So the plinth sort of climbs up, takes you to the entrance, and that corner sort of opens up. And there's also a side entrance, which is from the street. Now this area is full of buildings which are 8 stories high. And that's the lower floor, which is half submerged. So that would be a fellowship hall, while the prayer hall is the solid part. and it opens up completely to the outside at the lower level. And you just have a little text, you have a little open pantry, and you have some toilets. And above, what you see is where the stage of the so-called amphitheater-like plan of the church is. So that's where you enter. You create the sense of almost a double height space with a huge column to sort of anchor that entrance, and a large door in metal, and the steps which climb up, which go to the main sanctuary. And this is where you enter, where everything is facing the stage, and the baptism tank is underneath, and there is, you can see the layers of the wall. You can see the layers of the wall, which are basically letting in gradual light, filtered light, and stopping the view from the outside. And also there is a top light cutout which sort of comes down, and it washes down the wall when the service ends at about 12 o'clock. So it's one big hall space. So this is, I talk about the idea of appropriation of a space, of a place, remembering Super Studio, and of course Remkulas is finally a project about the wall. And why so? Because this was a competition project which was actually to transform an 1890s jail, the central jail of Bangalore, which had been shifted out of the city, and this was converted into this 22.5 acres was converted into a large urban space. And so here I think the intent was, so of course there was a big contradiction, you know, or there was, let's say, a big shift. There's a huge shift between its old usage, which was basically enclosed between thick, in a thick wall, tall wall, and nobody would escape. And there was a central tower, which around which almost, radially there were barracks. So now we were talking about it opening up, and that was quite a change for the city. And quite amazingly, I think they were with a public-private partnership. This became a national competition, which went into 2 stages. We did win it, and then we got to do it over the years, which talks about basically this change is actually about, one is the shift of how you, the older pattern, which is which was almost like an axial entry. I mean, we are all familiar with the bad guys or the heroes coming out of the jail gate from Bollywood movies. So what you do is you move between the parallel walls, and you have now what was actually the central core of control is actually the public space in a diagonal fashion, which is moving east-west. So that actually becomes the heart and sort of an urban gathering lung. And there has been wonderful meetings, wonderful fairs which have taken place there. Political rallies have happened. Design students having their exhibitions there, and it has certain other facilities for exhibition, and so it tries to find the balance between what was, and to be familiar with the pattern and to retain that, and yet introduce certain other elements. And some things had fallen apart, so that's where we introduced certain other elements to still keep the sense of the structure of the space, so that it does have the structure, but the manner of movement and the pattern of movement would actually make it very different in terms of perception. the modification of the buildings and opening them up, and transforming, almost sometimes having to remove certain parts which were ad hoc additions, and making new additions to clearly mark a new presence, and yet continue with the parallel walls going to the tower, and certain landscape elements. So you now guide all the water to come to a certain point where it can recharge the ground, a sunken auditorium on the left, and an open amphitheater, which is quite actively used for cultural programs. And that's the fairly reasonably large space with certain places to sit, and you have the barracks on the other sides. So it opens up a new area, and most of the trees were retained. So all those trees are old trees which were present, but the walls have been removed so that it is not enclosed. And this still becomes the focus, but the focus is, of course, eccentric to the public space. That's a top view of this, of the tower. And certain events which have taken place over the years, the additions to various functions. So I think the biggest challenge we found here was that although one can design, and I think this Arindam Datta at the Kurlavarti Forum recently was commenting that I think we are almost innocent about, we innocently think that if we create space, people shall come, but that can easily be destroyed by people who control it. So this space is, because of all the logistics of getting to use this space, not just the barracks, but the overall space which was meant for the city is open at only few hours of the day. There is a huge board with a whole lot of rules. So all good intentions can be killed with very silly controls, and that was a big lesson for us. I'm sure it's not a new lesson, but I hope this will all change gradually. This is an unbuilt, we came second in the competition, which was the Bhopal gas tragedy competition, which was only a landscape strategy, looking at complete cleaning of the brownfield and using the scars of removal of the earth as the final mark on the ground, and the factories which were present as places of passage, and the ground to, so we would have to completely change the soil to as much depth as it was contaminated, because as we all know that once the contamination seeped in with the rain over the years, it started getting into the water stream. And I think, and it continues if you don't if you don't change the earth and put it in a place where it can no longer leach into the ground. So here the idea was actually about not building, in almost looking at the act of healing as a very only as symbolic acts. Like in the middle picture you see the scar sort of held with trees, and the factory outline is with huge blocks of marble stone which are disturbing, and the passage between the two as suspended huge blocks under which you might get crushed. And as one goes, it comes into the second courtyard or the second building, which becomes a very calm and quiet and well finished environment with an enclosure which just leads on into the landscape, ending into the left picture, which is where you put a candle So it's just in the memory, that a simple act, just like people do in Kerala churches and in temples, and so it's the ritual which takes precedence for healing, and more than that, we do not want to make any symbolic um, gestures. The idea of, and of course, this was partially underground, the building, and a few years ago, we did part of the building is finished, but it's yet to open to the country. The Martyrs Memorial in Bangalore, which is a complete underground building. So here, actually, it's about, again, it's the path which takes precedence. So the only thing above the ground is actually the names of is only the names of the name plaques, and you move across. There is a tradition in Karnataka about the Veeragallu. The Veeragallu is actually about placing a little stone in remembrance for people who have bravely fought for their kingdoms. So this is an old practice. So it would be kept at the border of the, under a tree at the border of the village or of the kingdom, close to their place of where they belonged. And people would pay their respect to it. So this actually becomes a kind of, because this is about the martyrs since 1947 from the Indian Armed Forces, which includes the Army, Navy, as well as the Air Force. So it's full of names, and yes, if war is there, then the names will increase, and gradually it will look like a cemetery, and perhaps that is the intent, which is to not glorify war anymore. So the once one goes to the rear on the right to court 1 and further, you actually you go down by 6 meters under the ground, and the entire building is under the ground, so that the entire green space remains for people who come from the surrounding area. And the only thing that they see is the symbol, the stone as a symbol, the Veeragallu, the flag, the national flag, and the armed forces flags, and you only see the name plaques and the names. So that's the path which sort of goes into a underground labyrinth, which opens with courtyards with natural light, and then sort of leads you out from the other end. So the plan is, of course, is structured exactly as per how we could avoid. We had to remove about 4 trees of eucalyptus, but we managed to keep all the rest by twisting the plan around. So that's the 6-meter descent, and this place is quite popular with certain yoga enthusiasts who come in the morning and they do their yoga here, and which is quite nice because it's a very quiet place, and down below 6 meters, it's makes it all the more private. The kind of entrance which is sort of squeezed between the walls of concrete. These are slightly older pictures. When it was under construction, when you enter, you get this shafts of light. And these are the name plaques which hold the names of people who laid down their lives. And the courtyards, which bring in light and ventilation. So it's a completely naturally ventilated building. So these courtyards not only work as fire escapes, but now the green has actually descended on the sloping walls, and somehow, I mean, as intended, the building is going to vanish. And I think that's quite an encouraging thought, that that if anything had that you were repenting about in terms of the design of the building, you are well taken care of by the plants. So that's the 6 meter down, the hall, which is a simple straight hall with the courtyards on the right and the skylights on the left. So the sun keeps changing the intensity of light. So at times it moves in lines during the day. And this is the exit towards the rear side when you ascend again to the ground. So now comes the story of the Veeragallu, and this was a request from the committee, which was largely formed by armed forces people, which was so somewhat contradictory, because we always thought that a place for martyrs was something which was about remembering people who we lost. And so this kind of on one side the sadness of loss, and on the other side it's about showing strength, and that actually reflects on the scale of the Veeragallu. So it is actually almost 75 feet tall above the base, and it weighs 450 tons, single piece. And this is just a schematic thing of showing how such a heavy stone is normally lifted. You will see, I mean, there are much more complex drawings. So you shape the stone, you bring it on a 240 wheel truck, and then you rest it on on sort of supports, and then you put like a J stick, and then you encase the stone in the J stick, and then you pull it up. So this is quite an engineering feat, which was interesting by itself, and quite an engaging task, because it's also the journey of the 450-ton stone, because a 240 wheel truck doesn't turn easily, at all bends, and it cannot go over any flyovers. So quite an you can see the truck at the top, and the frame which was put up so that it could pull it up, and it would slide from the left to the right, so it would go up in this manner. As you can see in the lower diagram, I think that makes it quite clear as to how it is pulled up, and then it is dropped into a socket for its final place of rest. So these are few images that we took trying to document the quarry at the left. I don't know if you see my cursor, but you see that's where the stone is, the Veeragallu. And so this was the quarry from where it was taken out, and it's sheer, it's overwhelming to see this picture. So you see the truck there, and the stone at the bottom, the Veeragallu. These are just process pictures of when it was being shaped and cut, and so it was in the middle of the village, and this was not a mountain. It was all the stone is specially chosen stone, because it has no veins and no cracks, so that it would not crack on the way. And it was a big spectacle, and it's quite amazing to, not sure what to say, because it was a spectacle. And the truck sort of slips in under the stone to now begin its journey. So there were 4 trucks which were lined up together, and they would pull this out of the quarry. So that's the beginning. So the dust has started to rise, and the journey has begun. So that's the 4 trucks that you see. So they have to move completely synchronized at a regular speed and consistent speed. And the kind of interest that it sort of got from lots of people who would, the sheer size of the stone was something which was very impressive for the people coming through the villages and through the highway, and slowly being lifted at the side and then dropped into place. It's now getting finished. The right side image is maybe about a month old. The installation is done, but I think rest of the foreground is getting ready. And not to forget all the people who worked with their machines or otherwise. As the city sort of recycles itself, and that's perhaps something good that a lot of people are learning, that you can actually do a procedure on a building and create something with least effort and investment and minimum amount of waste. So the 2 buildings were actually identical. The left side building was exactly like the one on the right. So there is some addition on the top, and there is an extension of a screen which has been done on the left. But I think the surgical procedure is actually on the inside. So what you see is what the yellow portions are actually the ones which have been removed of concrete, including beams, slabs, staircases, without affecting the structure, and then putting almost like a steel cage carefully inserted within that to create 3 floors out of 2 floors in front, and making an additional floor at the rear block, and making a new lobby with its own staircase. So the red portions is what has been added, and the rest was present. So you now see 3 floors on the left and the addition on the top. A very light structure, but enormous amounts of light. So the building was literally sort of incised very, very carefully, and propped and added. And even the floor was sliced open so that the light would reach the center of the building to the ground floor. So this has been sort of kind of, I wouldn't say obsession, but I think it's a great tool which perhaps began from when Nisha was doing a study of the Bori houses in Surat, and that was 15 feet wide and 120 feet deep and 5 stories tall. And I was photographing it at that time. And there were little courtyards which would bring light for 4 to 5 floors. And it was incredible. I think these are things which are, I think they're wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful ways to deal with light and privacy and inwardness. So all the walls were removed completely, and there's a new skin. Why everything is gray is because of it's a fabric design studio, so they need completely neutral colors. I mean, complete neutrality of light, which itself is a big challenge because pretty much only 2 hours in a day is actually the appropriate light to be observing colors inside the studio. But of course, they have the light box and whatever. So that's why it plays it down. The skin is also gray with a cement board, and all these slabs have been cut open, and frame has been added. That's the skin, which is made with just bent steel, so that it's very light, and then clad the boards on 2 sides with insulation. Even adding springs, which we use in sofas to hold the insulation in place so it doesn't sag over time. And that's the terrace on the right side, and there are turbo vents at the top, so it sort of takes the hot air out from the entire building. It's completely naturally ventilated. There is no air conditioning. And that's the terrace with where these this was supposed to be planted with wild grass, which actually was never done. So it has been left as it is. It's just like that now too. So this was, of course, an 80s building, and now we are talking about a building which we managed to revive, which is again from 1890s, which was a school. Sorry, it was an orphanage in the beginning after the Mysore famine in the 1890s. It was made for boys, and they stayed here till they grew up with a trust, the RBNMS trust, and they had leased it to a client, and incredible property among other buildings that they have too, which they occupy and have a school for underprivileged children. It was in real poor shape at that time because of neglect, a lot of neglect and a lot of modifications, a lot of, I mean, unknowingly having harmed the building. And of course the trees and the seeds and, you know, the roots were going through the slabs and walls, and just because they couldn't really take care of it. So to revive something is another ball game, because I'm not a conservation architect, but I did make 140 site visits for that one project of 7,000 square feet, and it took 7 months. A lot done on site with sketches to revive it in a way that we would do actually just the minimum to get it really in good shape. So what you see, this almost like these props with the blue tips on the left, those are props for the beams, because the walls were mud mortar, and once the terrace waterproofing had cracked, water would get into the mud mortar, and the walls would sink and the beams would sink, and they would cause further cracks on the top, and the fig trees around, and the peepal tree, the seeds would start germinating inside the slabs and then come down the wall and further split the wall. So it was a complete cycle of understanding this process which was taking place. And so it's like putting steel pins in a fractured situation. So it's just these steel pins which have separate foundations. So even if there is, even after waterproofing has been done, even if there is a change in level. So this is how it looks now from what you saw earlier. The courtyard, trying to use everything that was there, just relaid the stones again, just did a new kind of skirting so that the ground splashing is taken care of. Replaced a few of the members, wooden members, but most of them where only the ends were damaged, it would be just capped with steel. So a very gentle touch, and tried to be as invisible and light. Here you see the left and the right. So I guess the building was like what you see now. So it's back in. So this is a house for an architect, which is designed by Nisha, and I have supported it for its execution from scratch. So her brief was about darkness, and which was very intriguing, and and she loved concrete. So of course we have all grown up with the, I mean, you can even see it in the roof of my room that it is not the best, but exposed concrete, that concrete was going to solve the problem of post-World War socialist living. So I think there is a certain romanticism and about the idea of concrete itself, which has grown on us, especially architects, whether it's about Corbusier, whether it's about various other architects or Ando or anybody else. So it has a very fragmented plan, where a central spine, which is made of concrete, which stabilizes the whole building, which is on low-lying filled-up land, and the rest of the enclosing spaces sort of attached to it, which you see in the diagrams and the study model. So it's a sequence of, through this spine of concrete, you actually travel, and I think it's about getting into the space gradually in a sequence, so that it sort of captures time and space and slows it down till you enter the core of the house. So that's the very simple front of the house. And that's the door, which is 2 floors high, which you enter. And you have the gargoyle, which collects all the rainwater from the terrace and collects it, and it's used for all the gardening. And that's how it, so each space actually opens to its own garden. I mean, so it's like having 5 homes, you know, it's like getting in from one home to the other home, although it's seamlessly connected from inside. That's the entrance and how the light sort of plays out over there. Suspended staircase. So you actually, on the most right-hand image, you will see it goes into the living room gradually as you pass through this passage. And when you arrive, the image on the left and the staircase on the right is of course going to the upper floor from that passage. So you arrive, and in the central thing at the bottom, you see the trapezoidal kind of shape, which is actually the bar, and on the left is the living space. That's the skylights, which sort of really contain it and make it very, very bright and always changing and transforming. It sort of reminds me of Sagrada de Familia, and somehow in this odd geometries and the skylight coming together in some way. So it's a house about where you suddenly different depths open up, and I think that's the beauty of it. On the left image, you see that the depth of passages open up, and they take you to other worlds. And I think that's, so you're constantly sort of enjoying the change of you know, what you're seeing and where you are. This is the lived condition of the house. So because they are very frugal, they live in the simplest of manner, but the richest of quality of life. So it's fantastic. Both the light fixtures were designed by me just for this house. That's the dining and a little breakfast area. That's the husband's study room. So she is herself a trained architect, and she never told us for an hour till our briefing that she's an architect. And so it was a lot of pressure, but it has been an absolute joy to work with her on this project, and now I'm doing another one for her. So it's been a pleasure to have somebody who can perceive, and she's a writer, so that's her desk where she can see the entire garden from her desk, and it's right next to her bedroom bed in part of that space. So it's like a little log hut which is attached with its own warmth and separation. So I think and it's very, very cozy. So it gives it a very different scale. And that's from the husband's study room. So it's only the wooden parts are basically the 2 study rooms. The rest is all either concrete or masonry, and that's the gargoyle, which is made of zinc, and all the details which go with that, and the sketches which one enjoys seeing it after one has gone through. So I will be closing shortly with just 1 or 2 projects, and because I think I've overstepped on my time. This is a project which I came to realize only down the line that so this picture is here because I think the change of context in today's world, I think the proliferation of images and that have sunk into our, or trying to sink into our brains, is enormous. And sometimes, like Vivek Vilasani is a good friend, and he sort of has made a series of things which are on similar lines, which tries to localize certain ideas of whether it's about the idea of consumerism or but also to bring a new familiarity of something that is completely alien and different, and make it possible to absorb. So this idea of the set, actually, this was a microbrewery, which is the largest in Asia. And it's the idea of making of the set which dawned on me, because the person who built it had gone into making movies, and he would talk about the Colosseum in Rome, and he wanted it to be just like that. And I tried long and hard to understand why, what is so special about that. And it was the whole idea of spectacle, enclosure, and the scale. So I think, so it went through a process. So it's a very thin building which just makes a ring around the site. It's a very rectilinear site. It's about 700 feet by some 120 feet. So it just becomes a ring of a building, which just makes an enclosure and makes a club towards the front, which you see in the section on the left, and then just an open space and cascading water, and just plants will take over, and the rest is almost made like a set which would last for about 20 years. Various experiments. So in some ways, there is a complete shift. So I mean, we have grown up with the idea of masters doing an architecture of a certain kind and a certain language throughout their life and perfecting it. But I think we live in a different time, and we have to wear a new hat at every juncture of every project. And not that should make us feel that we are schizophrenic, but it's more that times have changed. While when the masters, whether it was Khan, whether it was Corbusier, whether it was Doshi, Korea, Kanwinde, a lot of them, at that time, it was a coherent society. The expectations of, and of course, it comes from a socialist time, and we have literally entered into the neoliberal time, and the times have changed perspectives about people, consumption, and offerings of what people offer and what people want even or desire. So this could be a place in Italy, this could be a place in Rajasthan, this could be a place in Kerala, this could be a place in Bangalore. So that's its. So it, on one hand, I wouldn't say it's eclectic, but I think it's it has got certain primary rigor, and the only thing which I tried to do here was to make it very, very easy, and pick up certain familiarity of elements, which is what you see in the arches, which is actually inspired from there are two layers of screens, and as you see the Palace of Mysore, and I think that is the hidden sort of way it is being done, that it is not in the face. It is here and it is everywhere simultaneously, and I think that's what makes, and of course there is the beer to make you happy as well, and a place which is a lovely set of steps where one can dine, and at other times it is used for huge gatherings and performances. And that's the club, almost like a Russian, almost really full of gold and gilt and whatever else. Well, I didn't have any gilt. It's called gilt, G-Y-L-T, but I was not. I don't find myself guilty of doing it badly. So this is all recreated. So it's essentially a set, you know. So it's the permanence of a set, and we worked out various different components and various different ways of doing it, and proportions, and even branding graphics. Even for like the ones on the black and whites are basically their covers for drainage. And that's the kind of gathering. It gathers about 3,500 to 4,000 people on the FIFA final day. And what you see on the left is the stage, those steps. So this is a tiny underprivileged school extension, which I did for the same trust, the RBNMS Trust. And their brief was very simple, that they said they wanted one classroom, and they were actually plonking it right in the middle, and there are beautiful trees there. And I insisted that they look at the option of doing one classroom, yes, but to lift it up and to create something which ties up the entire little campus. It's a tiny campus in the center of the city where children from grade 1 to about 5 come. So it is just a simple pavilion structure, nothing special about it. It sits above the ground and creates a platform under it. And the only other element is a tying up element, which is almost like a, you know, like a frill. It goes, there is a embankment to the edge and to the trees. So now the children play here. They have parent-teacher meetings under this classroom. And that's the space. On the left side, you see the passage, which now becomes much more animated. As you can see on the right side image, the tree was pending when we took the image. But basically, it scoops where the classroom doors are opening, and they could dine here, and the classroom is pretty much like a pavilion, simple, just a stage structure with a little protection of wood so that they don't get hurt. And the only thing this project does is to make a place to play, and I think that's wonderful, because I think I've seen so much joy in their when they play around. And for the children who are waiting for their parents, there is a place. It's all open. So it's been just one classroom. So this was a nice project. So this is perhaps the last project which I'm showing, which is the Museum of Art and Photography, which I'm doing for Abhishek Podar. And so this is actually trained on the idea of that this has to grab eyeballs, and so it uses a little bit of colonial history. It uses almost the surreal works of Muhammad Hassan, almost that kind of effect. So it's a very simple block building which is open to the sides, and the simple layouts of galleries and everything. So I think the interesting thing about it is the structure, because the structure sort of moves out and then you don't have columns inside the space. So the facades actually behave like surfaces rather than. So this has been very well designed by Manjunath from Bangalore, and it makes an enclosure with stainless steel panels, which are going to be formed like this. So the big conversation between Hal Foster and Rem Koolhaas was about these. I mean, what is an art space? Does it need to grab eyeballs? Does it need to overwhelm the art? And I believe that it should not overwhelm the art at all. It should disappear and be absent when one is inside. When the art should consume each and every space, and so that's what it tries to do. Makes a very simple gesture with its own nuances here and there, sort of complex building as a structure, quite challenging because it's a very narrow site. So this has been an interesting experience to work with this. These are temporary scaffoldings, which I won't get into detail. These are scaffolding systems and methods, and how the skin sort of and the structure moves out to give column-free space to the top 3 floors, which are galleries, which are blank because there is supposed to be no natural light or ultraviolet light to go in. Just last week, a group of artists have who have been asked to do this. This is the Aravani project. They're based in Bangalore and they do wonderful work. And that's so I'm going to, yeah, I think this perhaps is the last. So this is the migration of people. Why I call it skeleton, because I think this is the project which perhaps we lost after COVID. The migration from the village to the city in the movie Do Biga Zameen, and of course now from the city to the village during COVID times. A horror, perhaps the only parallel is during partition, and it's extremely bothering. So this is the structure which perhaps will not be revived for quite some time. Interesting. This was supposed to be a public place of more like a number of restaurants and things. So this is in the House of Darkness, what we call as the House of Stories. So this is Nisha's art, which is a life-size tiger, and the tiger. So I've sort of done it with Abhishek Dasgupta, the photographer from Bangalore. I've done this. I curated how it should move into the house from the landscape, and I think it's been a wonderful thing to see how a tiger would consume. It's made of very thin, hand-woven, soft stainless steel wire, and it's real life size. So it was absolutely gorgeous to see how the tiger would go on the steps, on the bridge, and to the bedroom, almost like Buñuel's pictures. And Karen North's pictures now. Buñuel's film, sorry, not pictures. So what's the future? Is this going to be quite almost like science fiction? But we also see that after the migration back to the villages and the struggle with employment and things continues, our news is full of news about how East and West are very different, as if both are not human. Because I thought we had crossed these borders long back. Long back. And news and the eagerness to get into war plays out every day, sort of threatening neighboring countries who might be weaker and not the ones who are stronger. So in this condition, I'm just trying to understand that the erasing of old symbols, as it has happened in Iraq, it has happened in India, it has happened in America with the Black Lives Matter, it has happened in Afghanistan, it has happened in Russia. The top left is actually a speculative image because there is a conversation about that too being. So is this the only way to correct a past, or does it need correction, or does one actually live with it and consider it as a past when the rules were different, and be at peace with it and more human than anything else? Or is it really necessary to erase it? Or one is to remove it and put it in museums to remember it and yet not let it consume public imagination and space. So the realities, of course, are very different, which nobody is talking about much, which is about only three basic things: food, clothes, and home. Or are we going to march like this? Interesting that it actually comes from a film which is loved by adults as well as kids. And changing times, which could, is this how we want to think, that we all want to think alike as architects? I don't think so. I really don't think so. But I think the biggest challenge that we have is, I think democracy is only coming to terms to defining itself, and it is trying to define itself in the context of capitalism, which, as you can see, continues from across generations, across countries, and continuously. And this is how perhaps it will continue. So we have to know that our reach is limited in projects, not to make us feel guilty about what we do. Like the still life paintings, I think we have to do it well, and perhaps that's the essence of finding some meaning of doing it well, through doing it well. We are overtly dependent for patrons. It's an extremely slow profession, and takes years to come to reality. So what I'll end with is talking about that these projects are basically negotiated projects. I think they have the personalities, they have the presence of place, time, technique, client, and their imagination and our imagination. When I say our, it means Nisha's and mine. So it's the collapse of these, which happens through these. That's why I call them as negotiated bag of projects, because and I think the idea of still life is because here the backdrop is actually the architecture, which is actually immobile, and it is static, and it is something which can only give meaning by its specificity or its abstraction to anything that life that unfolds over there, in whether it's a home or whether it's an office or so on. So thank you so much for watching, and it's been a pleasure presenting. Thank you, Kamala Raheja, for organizing this, and to the team doing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Soumitro, for that. Madhura, can we go ahead with the questions?
Yeah. So we have a question from somebody that says, the example of the Martyrs Memorial with its pictures was amazing. It really articulated the importance of the spectacle or engagement process of public commissions. How does that compare to the process of private commissions, which tend to be more intimate?
Well, I think the primary difference, I think, is in the level of engagement, I think, from between the two. So here I would like to just draw on, maybe perhaps in the past, I think the executive, or let's say the IAS officers, or the responsible bureaucracy were far more engaged, and perhaps they were also empowered and given the authority to take. They were well informed. I'm sure they are still well informed, but I'm not sure if a lot of decisions are really left to them. So what happens with that is that the level of engagement from a client like the government is it's very loose-ended in terms of expectations. So there, I think you're totally on your own about the quality of work that you want to bring. So, but they give you complete freedom. The only thing that they don't give you is a good fee, a reasonable fee. It's very unreasonable because of, if you want to do anything properly, you need to spend a. So you have to do. It's your problem if you accept a job like that, because if you want to make 200 drawings, they have never asked for 200 drawings. If you can do it with 2, they're happy. I think the problem is more about I think the lack of funds, perhaps, is also, and the slowness of it to facilitate the project completion. I think that's always a big problem. Otherwise, I think it was an amazing opportunity, and both the Freedom Park as well as the other one, the Martyrs Memorial. And fortunately, we had very good people from the government, but I think that the machine is very slow. The private ones are perhaps more intensely involved, and that has its own joy to work with. Both can be overwhelming, but sometimes you can reason. So yeah, you have to negotiate again.
Okay, I'm sure that must have answered the question. We have another one that says, a lot of your work features sharp and clean edges, but the Bhopal Memorial deviates from it with a more rounded aesthetic. Was there a particular reason for that?
Okay, I think one is, I think it began with the idea of cleaning the brown field, so which basically means that you have to dig investigation bores into the ground and see till where the contamination has gone, and you have to remove that much of earth. So it could almost be like an irregular mountain that you are sort of taking out from, the bottom of the earth. And then you have to take it somewhere else. You have to seal the surface where you're dumping because it should not leach. And then you have to bring fresh soil here. So, so that actually emerges from dealing with the earth. So that is one. Second is, I think, I'm glad that this is an interesting question, that there is actually a presumption. There is actually a lineage of what has come through from, whether it's through Europe, whether it's through Bauhaus, whether it's through Corbusier, whether it's through Kahn or Doshi. it had this reliance on the idea of the straight line and the ease of construction which is related to it has existed. I mean, it has a passage actually. So I'm not so sure if I would apologize for it or say that it is detrimental, but I wouldn't. I disbelieve in formal characteristics of clean lines or terms such as straight lines, because I think it's about the idea, and the same idea can be translated in any manner of formal representation. So I wouldn't really categorize. So I think, first of all, important to understand while we work, we try to understand the core idea and our position and what we want to sort of convey or translate or represent and make. The formal baggage is not there, and perhaps is loosening up even more now. I'm sure that because it's the familiarity, if you're driving the same car or you go home the same way, but you don't remember that the road was blocked yesterday while you were accessing the home from that your familiar way, you'll still end up at the blockage because you forgot. So the hand also draws like that actually. So I think it's about that it has to remember what takes precedence and is the more important aspect, so that it doesn't go for the more familiar path.
I'm sure even that must have answered the question. It was anonymous. We have just one last question.
Yeah.
Having seen your practice since its early work, there seems to be a shift in the work. While some traits have remained the same: the rigor of the organization, the clarity of the plans, the play and manipulation of light, and the attention to detail, etc. The language seems to have changed from a more modernist language to one which is more loose, expressive, seems inspired by nature, and etc. Can you reflect on that shift and what may have brought that on?
Yeah, good observation. So I think one is, of course, there has been two hands at work. So they are a little more independent at the moment, because earlier I think we were doing all the projects jointly. Now we do discuss at the beginning stage and sometimes collaborate on certain projects, but sometimes we do it independently with our teams. So I think there is a difference definitely between what Nisha is presently doing and what I am working on presently, and the positions we take. So I think that's where it gets very subjective. So these are personal viewpoints about, so I wouldn't rate it. I mean, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't even look for continuity, because I think it's absurd. For me, that is absurd, because I think we also spoke about it, that this is not, according to me, it is not. At least I believe that this is not such a time and a society. It is, we are living in extremely diverse conditions and extremely diverse expectations. And I mean, do you think? I mean, typically, I would, if I was doing the church or the memorial, would I be also doing the largest microbrewery in town? I mean, on ethical grounds or some kind of constructed moral grounds? No. I think everything has its own requirement, and that's where I fail to agree that that consistency of language is critical for a practice. I don't think so. I think the commitments are at a different level, which is very, very particular to every project. And I think that's when it can actually deliver. So this, of course, can be misconstrued as acting like a mercenary to deliver something that is wanted. No, it is not what they want. It's actually interpreted and produced by us. So they may have a vague sense, but it's not that we are reacting to that. Actually, we are going under the skin of what they need or what they are trying to hint at. So at some grounds, at some level, it is also the you have to almost think like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and try to understand, which is not only understanding them, but also the hundreds and thousands of people who will come and visit your buildings, or everything that goes along with the building. You need to understand a lot more. So understanding society, culture, how we are in the present and what directions it might take in the future. I think these are important aspects to dwell upon.
Thank you so much. We'll be closing with the questions now. Mamta, do you want to take over?
Yes, thanks, Madhura. Thank you, Soumitra, for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
It has been a wonderful journey to go through your projects and the way that you have sort of, enlightened us with your thoughts on this. We've been actually meaning to have you over for quite some time, and unfortunately, it's the pandemic which has got you here finally. So thank you, thank you so much. Thank you. It was a complete pleasure.
Thank you, listeners, for being there. Yeah, bye.
Thank you.